G'day, mate. 40 here. So, a killer, someone who committed a triple homicide, showed up outside Nick Fuentes' home trying to kill him. And luckily for Nick Fuentes, the alt-right provocateur, he had, I assume, Ring so that he could see who was outside your door. So, you really don't want to open your door unless you know who's outside. And if you live in a big city, or if you are just extra careful about your safety and well-being, right, you always need to know who's outside your door before you open it. There are a lot of bad people in the world. Second, there is a price paid for provoking and offending people. When you needlessly provoke and offend people, you hurt people, and hurt people will always want to respond. This doesn't excuse this guy going to Nick's house, but my philosophy on live streaming, I want this live stream to improve the rest of my life. I want, after I finish this live stream, to walk out the door and to run into strangers, and in the tiny, tiny, tiny chance that they have seen my live stream, I would prefer that I am a better position to have a positive interaction with them, or to minimize the negative interaction with them on the basis of what I say. I want to have the best possible relations with everyone, and that will frequently mean having no relations with many people. Right? Many people would just prefer to have absolutely no relations with me. I'm fine with that. I accept that. But having people who want to have no relations with you, right, that's a lot better than having people come to your door to kill you. So there's a huge price to pay for being a provocateur. We had a shock jock in Denver who was shot and killed. There's a huge price to pay for fame. And if you are not willing to experience the increased danger and all the downsides that come with fame, doxing, and people taking great exception and setting out to hurt you, then stay away from fame. You can have a very good, productive life without soliciting fame. So when you solicit fame, you bring a whole lot of dysfunction into your life. Not everyone is as successful as the Joe Biden team at covering up the weaknesses of Joe Biden. So that was an extraordinary conspiracy carried out by the Democrats, the Joe Biden team, and the news media. And finally, we have an in-depth Wall Street Journal article about how Biden's team was covering up and protecting him from very early on in his administration. As Mark Halperin has noticed, in 2017, Joe Biden clearly appeared senile.
They wanted you to believe that Joe Biden was at the top of his game. He had the reins of government, and he knew exactly what he was doing. All these criticisms from Fox and yours truly and other people questioning Biden's cognitive decline. It was just mean, and it was wrong. Remember?
Start your tape right now, because I'm about to tell you the truth. And F you if you can't handle the truth. This version of Biden, intellectually, analytically, is the best Biden ever.
All right, so he starts out his statement saying, F you, roll the tape. He's incredibly obnoxious, incredibly wrong. Has he made apologies? All right, this is someone who's making the world worse. Joe Scarborough.
Not a close second, and I've known him for years.
And this
Just a liar.
kept going month.
Imagine what a total paucity of integrity you have to say things like the things that Joe Scarborough says. Right? Someone who's just sold his soul for MSNBC fame and money.
After month, until they couldn't lie any longer. Or, sorry, they just weren't very informed. All their friends in the White House were just keeping the truth from them. Well, now with Trump about to take office, we're learning the truth about a lot of things, how legislation works, the border, and now Biden's decline. The Wall Street Journal has another excellent report that sheds more light on what Biden was really dealing with. For starters, he had trouble meeting with his staff. on a typical time schedule. We talked about this actually, when his day would actually begin. So again, we were right. Here's what it says. Ideally, the meetings would start later in the day, since Biden has never been at his best first thing in the morning. Some of the people said if the president was having an off day, meetings would be scrapped altogether. Remember how we would say that he called a lid? He often called a lid at like 11 in the morning. And, oh, that's mean. That's not true. He's doing a lot of work in the residence. Well, this wasn't something that, just happened slowly over time. It turned out, according to this report, it happened during his first months in office. Again, we said this during the campaign of 2020. The guy was half the time non-compos mentis. On one such occasion in the spring of 2021, a national security official explained to another aide why a meeting needed to be rescheduled. He has good days and bad days, and today was a bad day. So we're going to address this tomorrow, the former aide recalled the official saying. Now, and this wasn't just meetings with lower-level staff. Interactions with senior Democratic lawmakers and some cabinet members, including powerful secretaries such as Defense's Lloyd Austin and Janet Yellen at Treasury, were infrequent or grew less frequent. Some legislative leaders had a hard time getting the president's ear at key moments, including ahead of the U.S.'s disastrous pullout from Afghanistan. Wow. You think there would have been some come-to-Jesus moment about this with the Democrat Party after what happened with 12 Americans dead with that Afghanistan withdrawal? But no, never happened. He started, 15 people died, excuse me. Oh, 13 people died. He started meeting with Secretary Austin even less. Well, it got so bad that cabinet members just stopped calling Biden, and senior Biden officials started replacing him altogether. For those who weren't so senior, well, they had to help the old man walk around repeating instructions to him, such as where to enter or exit a stage. Now, we've certainly seen evidence that
it doesn't take long for people to stop reaching out to you. Right. You turn the maximum of 3 times you could ever expect anyone to reach out to you if you blow them off. Usually you blow them off once, all right, they're not going to reach out to you again. But people just gave up on Joe Biden years ago.
He needed help with that. How many times did we cover that with Raymond and myself and other guests? And when Biden wasn't performing his official duties as president, he was off at campaign events where his team had to give donors pre-approved questions. And by the way, they kept writing checks. Nevertheless, how stupid are they? But still, Biden could not sound coherent. It's not surprising. He did this at public events as well.
Next question. Who do I call on next? Hang on a second. I got my list here. Hang on. I apologize. Aurelia of AFP.
Well, we're beating this into the ground. Joining us now is Dan Turrentine, co-host of The Morning Meeting, and former Democrat advisor Mary Catherine Ham, Outkick columnist, Fox News contributor. Dan, they were lying to us, the press. They weren't mistaken. They knew how bad Biden was. They weren't always behind closed doors, of course, but they have sources and contacts. So why were they so brazen in lying?
They wanted to. They wanted to win. They wanted to cling to power. I mean, the stories that came out of the 2020 campaign. I mean, it feels like it was ages ago, but during COVID, when Biden was primarily home in the basement, and they really safeguarded his nights and weekends because he was getting tired and starting to have kind of moments that staff saw. And, you know, if you think about it, even when he got in the White House and they were securing legislative victories, the story when they would leak it to the New York Times or the Washington Post was always that Biden was behind the scenes busy, but he never used the bully pulpit. He wasn't out giving press conferences and things of that nature. And so, you know, the party decided to roll the dice and rally behind him, even though for his reelection, even though they knew well that he was slowly declining and beginning to really struggle.
Well, Mary Catherine Ham, it doesn't look like in some days it didn't seem slow at all. It seemed like he was totally out of it. So we didn't really have a functioning executive branch or a commander-in-chief or a duly elected president who could make key decisions. We had functionaries making decisions and presenting them to him. Or maybe they didn't even present them to him. I don't know. We'll never know.
Yeah, we don't know. The whole thing is disgraceful. All the people who had access to him, including the press, knew what was going on. This is one of the most consequential cover-ups I've seen in my lifetime in a presidential administration. And a couple things that stuck out to me, and I appreciate the reporting, by the way, from these Wall Street Journal reporters, because they did the first story in August 2024 where it was like, hey, we can all admit that this guy's not really with it. And they got a lot of flack for reporting that at that time. And now here we have, like, you know, we were all right. The American people were all right, by the way.
No. The first major story from the Wall Street Journal was before the debate. It wasn't August of this year. It was something like May.
86% of them in some polls in February of 2024 saying, hey, we can see what's in front of us. He's not well enough to do this for another 4 years. Nonetheless, the people in charge, apparently a co-presidency with like Ron Klain and Jake Sullivan, not okay with me. They clung to power using and abusing the rules of COVID to sort of put this protective circle around him that never was really punctured because no one was curious enough to look closer because, as my friend says, they wanted to win. And that is a problem. It's a giant problem. And a lot of American people saw it.
Yeah, well, Dan, we covered it from day one of the campaign.
It's awesome to see Dan Turrentine getting on Fox all the time. He's such a fair-minded, empathic, like bends over backwards to try to understand the opposite side, and yet also a skilled Democratic strategist. He was chief of staff for the Democratic governor of Colorado, and Mark Halper and Sean Spicer do such excellent work on the morning meeting on two-way. I hope a cable network gives him millions of dollars. He deserves a much bigger platform, as do all the major players on two-way.
I mean, I know Biden a little bit, like, you know, see him around town, you know, in the old days, and he was always a goofball, but it was obvious he wasn't the same person. Right. But what did they do? They called us and others who were reporting on this mean, or it was disinformation. They accused us of mis and disinformation, Dan. And who is the real guilty party here? The press and the White House and the Democrats who knew they could not meet with him.
Yeah, they decided to try to browbeat everybody into submission. I mean, there were lots of people in the party that knew about this, and if anybody spoke up, as my colleague just said, if you got out of line, you heard from the White House.
But if you like Dan, like I like Dan, then think about how likable Republican strategists could be if they just simply extended themselves and tried to show empathy for the way that people on the left experience life. I mean, this is what I try to do. I'm not as good as Dan Turrentine, but I try to have empathy for how different people with different hero systems experience life.
You wanted a meeting in the White House, if you wanted an exclusive, leak to the press, you had to play ball with them. And it was really because they thought if they gave an inch, that it would help Donald Trump, that everybody was kind of aligned, that you couldn't do it, including a lot of people in the mainstream media. And the media is going to have a reckoning on this now for people to start saying, oh, we saw signs of it. But at the time, nobody wanted to say it. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, look, the problem for the party is we have a trust problem. Tens of millions of people saw with their own eyes what was happening. We told them, kind of like Obi-Wan Kenobi, like move on, nothing to see here. And people formed their own opinions. And ultimately now we have to try to earn that back by kind of having this conversation with the public.
Well, and people who were wrong and covering up the truth.
Okay, let's look at the chat. Elliott Blatt says, what do the Democrats want to accomplish with power? They seem to want power for the sake of having power. No more than Republicans. So what do Democrats want? They want harm minimization. That's a big deal to Democrats. So, for example, if Narcan, easy availability of Narcan will reduce drug overdoses, they want more Narcan. If we need cleaner water, they want cleaner water. If we need cleaner air, most environmental regulations have been pushed forward by Democrats. So cleaner air, cleaner water, safer roads, these have been efficient, clean, safe sewer systems all right, these are often national parks, right? These environmental concerns have been largely promoted by Democrats. They want increasing fairness. So they generally want the rich and corporations to pay a larger share. That's not such a ridiculous perspective on taxation. Socialized medicine. So our medical system is simultaneously the best in the world, right? You get the people, your average American citizen has access to the best healthcare in the world, right? The rest of the world free rides on American healthcare developments, such as in technology, in medication, in pharmaceuticals, in techniques, all right? The rest of the world free rides on American medical innovation. But you lose your job, right? You lose your health insurance. There's an argument to be made for Medicare for all, which Democrats would support. So the idea that Democrats just want power and Republicans just want to give up power, no, they both want power. They just have a different hero system. So for Republicans, their greatest concern is threat from outside the country and threats from inside the country. Republicans want law and order, want safety, and want strong borders, and want to keep America as strong and safe as possible. Also, Republicans have more allegiance to values such as hierarchy and loyalty and punishment for norm violators. So Democrats have greater openness to new experience, right? They're more innovative with many forms of family relationships. So I'm not a big fan of gay marriage, but if you think gay marriage is a step forward for human civilization, then that's been primarily promoted by the Democratic Party. So in certain situations, right, you want socialism, right, to deal with something like the coronavirus, right, some sort of socialist governmental response, closing borders, having testing kits quickly and easily and freely available to people, having public health taking a leading role in trying to keep Americans safe and to mitigate against influenza epidemic, right? There are a lot of arguments for a more socialist approach. So that's just off the top of my head. Republicans seem to have a clear agenda. Yes, it's clear to you because you're on the right, and the Republican agenda is to stop illegal immigration, control immigration, law and order, get tough on crime, punish criminals more severely than Democrats want to punish them, stop promoting transsexual identity among children in particular, stop having drag queen story hour, stop defecating on traditional American values and the traditional American family unit, and create incentives so that hardworking people are incentivized to work hard and effectively and efficiently so they can keep more of what they earn, and incentivize lowlifes and freeloaders to become much more constructive with their job. So it's not easy for me to try to make the case for Democrats because that's not the way I think. So that was my attempt, just off the cuff.
Out because there's going to be just a very few number of Republicans who have to vote against it. For very few, they'll need to convince. In other words, I think the vast majority of Republicans will be for it. Johnson's for it. MAGA's for it.
All right, this disaster over a continuing resolution makes me highly skeptical that Republicans will be able to pass effective legislation under Donald Trump. So Democrats and Joe Biden passed a ton of legislation. I'm clear that some of the legislation made America worse. Some of it may be indifferent. Some of it may have made it better, but they were effective. And my chief concerns about the Trump administration are that it will be ineffective, incompetent, and corrupt. And none of those concerns have been assuaged. I still fear chaos and nihilism from Donald Trump on down, with way too much just chaos and incompetence and corruption. Right. Those are my biggest concerns. I support Donald Trump. I like his agenda of restricting immigration, reconfiguring trade to be more aligned with the interests of American workers. I like Donald Trump's agenda not getting into any more forever wars. I like Donald Trump's agenda to restore normal protections for men accused of sexual misconduct on college campuses. Right. I support the Republican and Donald Trump agenda overwhelmingly. I'm concerned that Donald Trump is not particularly good at running things. And I'm concerned that Republicans are not particularly good at passing legislation. Almost all our shutdowns for the past 30 years have been caused by Republicans. They go through this disaster again and again and again.
And it's a mistake to think of Johnson as a MAGA speaker. He's a religious conservative from the South who's made nice with MAGA, but he's really not like kind of pure MAGA. And the deal he made that got scuttled, not only did MAGA oppose it, but no one true MAGA would put a pay raise for Congress in a must-pass bill. That's just out of touch with the MAGA sensibility. If it passes, okay, Trump will.
So I'm concerned Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House, is simply not particularly competent. And he's only governing with a 2-seat majority. This is not looking good for Republicans.
Will be for it, obviously. Again, I assume Musk will be. And it will be a big victory, and it will be a huge turnaround. One of the biggest mistakes made in coverage of Congress all the time, is the press announces, because the leaders announce, we have a deal. And in this case, Trump endorsed the deal. And you say, well, of course it's going to pass now. They have a deal. Why are they announcing a deal if it's not a done deal? And the answer is because sometimes they have to take a little bit of a risk and put something out there and see how it goes. I'm not shocked at all that Hakeem Jeffries is against it for all the reasons I said. But I wonder if when they announced the deal, they had a strategy to get 218 votes. And I still wonder that. I heard all day from people who listened to me on the morning meeting who said,
no, they don't. This was defeated after Mark Harperin spoke.
You don't get it. This isn't about the old rules, and they're just blowing things up, and then they'll figure it out. This is not like a normal way of governing, and that's what people voted for, and that's how this.
Right. Blow things up is sometimes a great strategy, but blow things up is a great strategy only within the context of a greater plan.
Is going to go. And I don't disagree with that. But being against the status quo and being for blowing things up doesn't remove your obligation to actually have a plan. You still can have a plan. They're not incompatible. And I don't know if they have a plan to get 218 votes. It doesn't seem to me like they do. I wonder if they thought or asked Hakeem Jeffries, might he be for it? It's possible because of how tribal everything is that they couldn't even ask him. Because if they asked him, then they're basically saying, we want your blessing for this. And because of how tribal and zero-sum everything is, if a word got out in MAGA that they sought the blessing of Hakeem Jeffries, it's a bad bill. It's no longer a MAGA bill if they wanted.
Right, and this is the MAGA sensibility, and it's incredibly self-defeating when it comes to being effective. Right, the MAGA, let's blow things up. Right, it may feel good, but it's not going to accomplish much if you're embarrassed to even solicit support from Democrats when they have every reason to support you. So I was just thinking about identity because I just read a new book, Nationalism, A World History, by a Dutch professor, Eric Storm. So for the first 16 years of my life, my primary identity was Desmond Ford's son. My father's an evangelical Christian theologian and evangelist. I had a sub-identity during 7th grade as a marathon runner. I finished 5 marathons. Starting at age 14, I determined I wanted to be a journalist. So by about age 16, 17, journalist was my primary identity. I edited my high school newspaper. I was doing a news report on the local radio station. I was writing for the local newspaper, the Auburn Journal. So my primary identity for myself and for many people who knew me was journalist. And so people expected me to become a national figure in political journalism. Then I went back after high school, lived a year with my brother, and I guess I was primarily known then as what the hell? Let me just play something. Okay, be right back.
His support, but I would say as of now, I don't think it's going to pass. I don't think it's zero chance. And like I said, I think most Republicans will be for it. So we'll have a vote. It'll fall far short of 2/3, I think. And then the question will be, can they replace the necessary number of Republicans they lose on the regular? Well, first the question will be, can they get it out of the Rules Committee? Because as most of you know, because you're students of all of this and you have PhDs in Schoolhouse Rock, they had to put 3 MAGA, what we call extreme MAGA, 3 MAGA folks on the Rules Committee, and they'll have to vote to let the thing go to the floor. If they get it out of the Rules Committee and they put it on the floor, then can they get enough Democrats to replace the Republicans they lose? And can they whip Republicans in it? Tim Burchett of Tennessee is an incredibly MAGA hardliner on spending. And I don't say hardliner in a negative way. He cares a lot about spending, doesn't like raising the debt ceiling. I heard him do an interview about an hour ago in which he trashed the thing. They're not giving him enough time to read it. It was cooked up in a back room, da-da-da. But then he said he might vote for it because Donald Trump's for it, and that carries a lot of weight where he's from. So if Burchett is open to voting for it, then I think the thing could pass. Like I said, I don't see the votes right now. And if it goes down, I don't know what they'll do. And as I said, even if they get it out of rules and even if they get it off the floor and vote it, I'm not sure the Senate's going to pass it. So a long way to go. We still have a shutdown. The other thing I wonder is if Republicans have a PR plan if there is a shutdown. Talked this morning about how Newt Gingrich is one of the few Republicans who says, shut down, bring it on. We can win this fight. He says, we got a historic majority in 94 after a shutdown. But you need a plan for a shutdown. And as I said, you can be for jihad politics in a shutdown and shake things up and do things in a different way, but that doesn't preclude the need to have a plan. There are ways to win that fight, but I wonder if they've had discussions about it because the press will blame the shutdown on the Republicans. The president of the United States, I don't mean Donald Trump, I mean Joe Biden, still not involved in this as far as we know. The vice president, who we reported this morning, was supposed to fly to LA at 9 tonight. She's canceled that. I think she needs to be here because her vote might be needed in the Senate one way or the other, and wouldn't look great to have her flying across the country while this potential shutdown was taking place. So that's where that stands. Happy to take your questions about it when we go to your questions, and my colleagues will keep us honest on.
Okay, my God, why does everything sound weird? Let me try to figure out what's going
on any news that develops on that front during the program. So let's switch gears to talk about a topic of great interest to me, which is our cities, and particularly the politics of our cities, both the electoral politics of our city and the governance of our cities. And if my colleagues could help me out and bring in the 3 folks from the Manhattan Institute, that would be fantastic. As I said, if you're not familiar with the Manhattan Institute, it's a New York-based organization that does a lot of
beat Kamala Harris by 23 points in that same city. So there was an over 60-point shift in Doral, which is, by the way, 80% foreign-born of the city.
All right, so Mark Halperin had 3 people from the Manhattan Institute on his show this evening. So Manhattan Institute is a center-right institute. Heather McDonald is part of the Manhattan Institute. All right, getting back to identities. So we all usually have multiple identities. We may identify strongly with our religion, with our race, with our tribe, with our ethnicity, with our favorite sports team, with our profession. And I was just thinking about a history of identity. So 3,000 years ago, you were part of the tribe of Israel. Your primary identity was tribal. And then thinking about my own identity. So I wanted to become a journalist, and then at about age 20, I decided I wanted to become an economics professor. So I made economics my main thing. Then I was basically bedridden for 6 years with chronic fatigue syndrome. So invalid was my primary identity. Then in the middle of that, I converted to Judaism. So convert to Judaism became my identity. Then Dennis Prager devotee. I was sharing like Dennis Prager videos with a lot of people. And I developed a strong identity as a Dennis Prager devotee. And then I started writing on the pornography industry. And so I lost that Dennis Prager identity and moved into the identity as a blogger, and then a vlogger who liked to talk about uncomfortable topics from the pornography industry to Jewish influence to Chinese influence to male-female differences to ethnic differences, group differences. That different groups have different interests, and so that's become a primary identity. Bloody hell, Kick simply does not stint on the spam. All these people, hey, I'd love to help you reach a wider audience and increase your viewership. My network of gaming enthusiasts is always looking for new streams. Add me on Discord. My God, it's incredibly annoying. Here I am trying to create some quality product. right. So getting back to, just talk a little bit about Dennis Prager, because he had a major influence on my life. And one thing that I noticed very early on with Dennis Prager is he put an enormous importance on hearing from people how he had changed their life. And I was just thinking that we create a recipe for how people relate to us, right? We teach people how to relate to us. And so Dennis Prager is an engaging, charismatic, glib personality. And if you wanted to connect with Dennis Prager, you knew what you had to do. You had to tell him how he'd affected your life. And so right now, Dennis Prager is hospitalized. He sounds like he's paralyzed. And so I certainly don't begrudge a guy who's been breathing through a ventilator for weeks, now breathing through a CPAP, right, struggling, right, been through a very painful experience when he fell and broke his neck in the shower a few weeks ago. So I certainly don't begrudge him reaching out for people's prayers and reaching out for people's messages of condolence. I can understand when you're incredibly vulnerable that you really want to hear that. But Dennis Prager has never stinted on reaching out and asking people to tell him how he's changed their life. And it just seems weird because I can't think of any other public figure who so continually puts it out there, please write to me and tell me how I've changed your life. Like, what's going on there? I can't imagine doing that. All right. Normally, a scholar doesn't want to hear from randos, right? Normally, the sharpest, smartest, most accomplished, most effective, most thoughtful people don't want to hear from randos about how he's changed your life, right? It's on the one hand, it's completely understandable if you're an attention addict, like I have been much of my life. But on the other hand, from like the 10,000-foot level, it's really weird.
Hi, everyone.
Right. This is Marissa Streit, the CEO of Prager University.
Just talking to David Prager, Dennis's oldest son, and we were updating each other about how Dennis Prager is doing. And we have some really good news. And so we wanted the entire PragerU community to listen in and get an update. Again,
I love how they keep telling us, oh, we got news, but they're so incredibly closed-mouthed. They so didn't address basic questions about what's going on with Dennis. And so when something is so fake, when something is obviously so manipulated, like when some kind of con is being run on you, right? It's usually better to have a con run on you than have a train run on you. But it doesn't feel good, man. How stupid do you think we are, right? All the people who know something about what's really going on with Dennis Prager have been incredibly tight-lipped and simultaneously telling us, oh, we just don't know. We're waiting for the doctors. It's phony.
Again, thank you so much for all your prayers and the videos and the letters.
Dennis Prager has made it really clear that he has very little faith in the power of prayer, and he puts very little value on prayer, and that this is the primary form of outreach from his friends, employees, and supporters, that Dennis Prager needs your prayers. Dennis Prager is about the least interested in prayer religious personality out there. Now, Dennis Prager's Judaism, right, his religiosity is just unrecognizable to any normal religious Jew, just like Jordan Peterson's Christianity is just completely unrecognizable to any normal Christian. So neither Jordan Peterson nor Dennis Prager are religious in any traditional, normal understanding of the word religious when it comes to their respective religions, right? What they have done is that they have created a platform essentially to elevate themselves through what they articulate as the wisdom of their particular religion, when their own approach to their religion is unrecognizable by any average adherent.
Show them to Dennis, and he absolutely loved them. And we also have some really great news from the Prager family. So, David, why don't we start with the new addition to the Prager family, and let us know a little bit of what's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, is that your Make Education Great Again shirt?
Absolutely.
So I believe that David Prager works for PragerU. So he's not just a disinterested observer here.
Absolutely.
from our gala last week, which was really cool. Very exciting.
So fundraising for PragerU, gala for PragerU, almost all the influence and almost all the views for PragerU are bought, right? I could buy advertising that auto plays my videos throughout social media, just like PragerU does, and I could buy a billion views. I could buy 10 billion views. And then I could come on here and say, look, we're changing the world. We're reaching young people. We've started 44s. But so much of this is just a major con. And I like the content. I am aligned with most of the content on PragerU. So this is my team politically. This is my team culturally. This is my team religiously. But I simultaneously recognize the con.
So yeah, very exciting news. My younger brother Aaron just had his first child. It was a baby girl, born healthy. We actually did a Zoom with my dad, and he was smiling ear to ear the whole time. I was sort of joking with him because I always said that he was the more difficult son. So as the baby was crying, I was excited to see that he was already getting payback. I said, revenge is on its way. So that was really exciting. I think gave what my dad really needs right now is a lot of hope and optimism. And that segues well into where he's at right now. So we mentioned last week that he has some challenges.
Who doesn't need hope and optimism? Now, I recognize that there are vulnerable periods of our lives where we are more in need of hope and optimism, but I don't know how anyone could operate day in and day out with any energy and commitment without hope and optimism.
Challenges in his breathing. That's by virtue of having an injury to the area of his spine that sends nerves to his diaphragm. That is improving, and that's what you want to see. I've learned this recently in a spinal cord injury, is you want to see improvement while also understanding that you have to really believe in patience and appreciate that things will take a long time. The good news is that while he's still on a ventilator, which sounds scary, he's spending most of his day, I would say a good 3/4 of his day now, breathing on his own in what's called a CPAP setting. So it's not the mask that people generally see from CPAP, but enables a setting that people can breathe on their own. And when they need more assistance, they can go back to a setting that would provide more of that breathing help. So that's phenomenal news. I think he's also boosted by the fact that he is, like you said, getting letters from people everywhere, short videos from people. So please send those. I can't say everyone will get read. There are a lot of them, but a lot of them do get read. And it really boosts his spirits. So that's info@prageru.com. Fully there, fully cognizant. He has been saying that he wants a Coca-Cola of all things lately. I think he's also.
All right, I went to Grok and tried to figure out why people solicit praise, because particularly as an Australian, it just seems so unmanly to be soliciting praise. I mean, would you like a dozen roses sent to you on your doorstep from a stranger? Right? I'm not sure I would be. I think I'd find it disturbing. And seeking praise from listeners is a bit like asking for roses from randos to your door. You're seeking a one-sided connection with people you don't know. You're asking them to tell you how wonderful you are, and you're encouraging a parasocial relationship. And just because you watch my show does not make you my friend. Just because you read my blog does not make you my friend. Right? I don't want parasocial relationships with people who listen to me online. Right? If I have additional private interactions with you, then that's great. That's a whole different thing. But encouraging parasocial relationships is usually not a healthy thing. I would just suspect that healthy people primarily care about receiving love from people they know, not from strangers. Right? Most women I've known did not appreciate attention and gifts from men that they were not interested in. Right? Actors are the group that I think of when it comes to people who are just perpetually hungry for adulation. Right? I just can't recall any public figure so actively solicits praise and adulation as Dennis Prager does. And not just now in this time of need, but on an ongoing basis in his public work. So I put into Google, why do people ask for praise? And I got this AI response. People want it for social validation, for boosting their self-esteem, by confirming that they're doing things right, that they're valued by others. it fulfills their need to be recognized and accepted, and it creates positive emotions when they get compliments. So particularly people with low self-esteem, people with a low opinion of themselves, then they're particularly thirsty for external validation through praise, and that will temporarily make them feel better. But if you stand on your own 2 feet, I don't get why you're going to solicit praise. I mean, I got some beautiful praise this week, and I loved it. And I even, like, I cut and paste it and put it in somewhere that I can, like, keep it and think about it at times. But it added to my happiness level maybe 1% temporarily. So one bloke wrote on X, "I listen to you often, Luke. You're a rare bird. Someone who has thoughtful, considered opinions, strong convictions, but who manages to examine things truly critically. What sets you apart is your openness and your vulnerability and your extreme ownership of your life." So that was lovely, but I just can't imagine soliciting that sort of stuff. Right? So what kind of insecurity or uncertainty or need for validation or need for emotional regulation, right? Praise acts as a mood booster. It's a stress reliever, can help you manage your emotional state, especially in high pressure situations, right? I make a lot of live streams, make a lot of blog posts, and the primary reason consciously that I do it is that I enjoy feedback. But frequently, I will experience more benefit from harsh, critical, but accurate feedback. I just find I often find more value, more benefit from harsh, accurate criticism than from accurate praise. Now, when I was younger, external praise and external criticism often shaped my moods. But as we all get older, I think our own opinion steadily becomes more important to us than the opinions of randos. So I would say that by 2010, right, my internal sense of self was stronger than it was in 2000, let alone 1990 or 1980. So I think as people learn to stand on their own 2 feet, right, the opinions of randos matters less and less. I'd say 2020 was kind of the Rubicon, going through COVID and staying open to a whole variety of contradictory perspectives on COVID. And I think that was a time that I could recognize that, yeah, I can really stand on my own 2 feet. I no longer need other people to tell me who I am. So in 1990, 1980, in year 2000, 2006, 2008, 2010, I still depended to a great deal on other people telling me who I am. And so a large motivator for making such a public spectacle of myself online was to get other people to tell me who I am. But I can't imagine moving through my 50s and my 60s, and Dennis is, what, 76, 78? Moving through your 60s and your 70s, and you're still regularly soliciting strangers to tell you how I've changed your life, right? If such praise from randos uplifts you, then criticism from the same randos you would think would depress you. Okay, let's get a little bit more from Mark Halperin's show.
Oakland, Los Angeles, San Francisco.
There's some city you'd point to based on the election results and based on the current governance and perhaps even the existence of potentially strong candidates of the right. Is there a city or two you'd point to say, watch that city, that's a city that's ripe for a Republican mayor or a more conservative mayor?
I would jump in and say, I would look at cities in the American West, places like Denver, Phoenix, Tucson, and even to a lesser degree, but, still in play, places like Oakland, Los Angeles, San Francisco, all of which have seen, really major shifts, particularly in the last election cycle. And I'll just, quickly give some examples of, support for this proposition. I mean, if you just look at California, right, which is one of the deepest blue states in the country for a really long time, look at the local election results this last November. I mean, it really is astounding. You have in Los Angeles County, George Gascon, the longtime district attorney who survived a recall attempt in 2021, losing his bid for re-election to Nate Hochman, who ran for DA on an unabashedly law and order campaign platform. Further north in San Francisco, where Chesa Boudin who was a very far left DA and was ousted in 2022, his replacement ran for her first election and won handedly, again, on a sort of very traditional law and order platform. That was Brooke Jenkins. Right across the bridge in Oakland, you had Pamela Price and Sheng Tao, the mayor of that city. Sheng Tao was a very sort of, friendly to the defund the police movement, very anti-cop, very anti, traditional criminal justice and law enforcement. And then you had Pamela Price, who was, sort of very far left DA, who ran on a platform of not prosecuting certain offenses and not using incarceration as much as possible. Well, they were both recalled successfully. Again, in some of the deepest blue cities in one of the deepest blue states. And if you look at places like Colorado, Arizona in particular, you're going to see lots of ballot initiatives, including in California, by the way, where Prop 36 passed 70-30, which was astounding to me. Prop 36 reversed in part some of the things that we saw in Proposition 47, which had raised the threshold for felony theft, had decriminalized certain kinds of drug offenses.
So strongly blue states, strongly democratic states, highly diverse states, they don't like crime either, right? Liberals don't like crime either. And we are seeing a widespread backlash against laxity in law and order.
Yeah, but if you look at Arizona, you had 4 different ballot propositions, one of which created a new court fee to fund first responders. You had another one, which, by the way, passed with nearly 2/3 of the vote, that makes residents eligible for tax refunds when the government fails to enforce laws, ordinances, and such prohibiting things like illegal camping, loitering, obstructing streets, panhandling, public urination and defecation, and the consumption of alcohol and drugs in public spaces. Now, that's exactly meant to address the kinds of disorder that we're seeing.
So I used to have this Luke Ford advisory committee when I was blogging from about 1998 until it's kind of petered out over the last few years. And one member of the advisory committee came in from Canada, and I was showing him around Sunset Boulevard, and we were walking past the Hustler sex store and past the big music clubs into more residential parts of Sunset Boulevard, and there just aren't many public restrooms in America. Right? In Australia, there are abundant and decent public restrooms with toilet paper, and they're kept up in good shape. There are so few in America. I was just dying. I was just busting to take a leak, and so I turned down this alley, and I'm just like, unzipping my fly, and I'm just desperately about to release. And some guy on a motorcycle, so he was guarding the alley. This was like on a Sunday afternoon, like at 3:00. All right. He comes roaring up on his motorcycle, and I thought he was an undercover cop. I showing him my driver's license. He just says, "Get out of here. Get out of here." But I mean, I was in pain. And there was nowhere to take a leak. Finally get to my truck, and I just kind of hide behind my open door and just let loose in the outside parking lot. Just kind of, I mean, it's a terrible thing to piss in public and to defecate in public, but America doesn't make it easy. And the reason that we can't have nice things is that we got a lot of highly dysfunctional people. It's a lot easier to have nice things like abundant public restrooms in Europe, in Australia, in New Zealand, in Japan. It's not so easy in the United States, where there's a huge underclass that would quickly turn public restrooms into spots to do drugs, trade drugs, engage in prostitution. So because we don't adequately punish, our criminally inclined, and because we've got such just an enormous underclass with low IQs and low prospects, it just diminishes the quality of life for everyone else, and so you have a very difficult time having nice public spaces and nice public restrooms because of our enormous dysfunctional underclass. And I don't think it was this bad in the 1950s and 60s. Have the demographics of this country changed any over the past 50 years? Here, I've got a suggestion. Let's not bring in members of any underclass. Let's stop importing the world's trash. All right, let's stop digging our problem deeper so that perhaps one day in the future we can have nice things.
In American cities, if you look at Colorado, you had Prop 128, which was a truth in sentencing regime passing overwhelmingly in a very blue state, which means that people who are convicted of crimes have to serve a minimum of 85% of their sentence, depending on the crime they were convicted of, before they become eligible for release. You have another ballot initiative which appropriated nearly $400 million for police recruitment and retention. You had an amendment to the Constitution in Colorado, which takes bail eligibility off the table for certain first-degree murder cases. I mean, these are all very sort of tried and true, traditionally associated with the right of center law and order initiatives, picking up tons of support in exactly the kind of places that you would have least expected it just 5 years ago. And so the nature of that shift.
Okay, let's think about identity. So if you were part of the ancient tribe of Israel 3,000 years ago, 2,500 years ago, 2,000 years ago, your identity was primarily tribal, and all religions prior to Christianity were tribal religions, right? Each tribe had its own religion or religions. And so you had primarily a tribal religion, and that tribe would have a religious manifestation. Now, Judaism is the only major tribal religion left in the world today, but prior to 2,000 years ago, tribe was primary identity. And if your tribe was part of a larger empire, right, I would still expect that your identity was primarily your particular tribe within the larger Persian, Babylonian, Egyptian empire. Then Christianity comes along, and Christianity develops a community where people look after each other, and Christianity takes over the Roman Empire, not just by the force of arms, but also it offers a higher quality of life, because you can join a community where people look after each other, take care of each other, and therefore there is a higher quality of life within the Christian community compared to the alternatives. And so starting about year 400 of the Common Era, 500 of the Common Era, religion becomes a primary identity. And then Islam develops out of Christianity and Judaism. And so from about year 500 until about year 1500, 1600, 1700, religion is the primary identity in the Western world. Right? So religious differences between Christians, Jews, Muslims, and heathens were much more important than those differences between nations. This is Dutch professor Eric Storm in his new book on nationalism. Right? The identitarian boundaries between them were much sharper. Christianity was seen as a fundamentally coherent unity prior to the Protestant Reformation. And Muslim empires drew very sharp distinction between the territory of Islam, the territory of war. Also, there were huge social and legal differences, right? You had different social groups. You had the nobility, you had the monarchy, you had clerics, you had burghers, meaning businessmen, and you had peasants, and they all behaved and dressed in distinct ways, and they didn't necessarily feel that much in common with other members of their country. So from the perspective of those above them, peasants and serfs were not even regarded as fully human. Right? So nations were not stable, fixed entities. And so there are two major perspectives of nationalism. There are the modernists, which is the prevailing perspective on the academic study of nationalism, and that is that nationalism developed basically around the time of the French Revolution. Nationalism developed late. It developed in the late 18th century. And then the minority position within the academic study of nationalism is that you had incipient nationalism in England in the 15th, 16th, 17th century, and then it transferred to France and to what became the United States. So you had often quite vague ethnic boundaries, which would somewhat overlap with state borders, but there was a lot of fluidity there. So you had social and religious cleavages that were more pronounced than racial and ethnic differences. Then, to successfully wage war, the state needed to become much more centralized. And if you wanted to make it in your state, then you needed to usually go live at court. So we had the development of centralized states in Europe from the late medieval period. So that means from about year 1500 on. And this undermined the supremacy of the Pope, with England, first of all, under Henry VIII, throwing off the yoke of the Catholic Church. And this also weakened the territorial power of the landed nobility because they now had to go to court. They had to go make their way at court, learn the mores of being a courtier. They didn't have strong independent power of their own anymore. So the process of state centralization began in the 12th century, and by the 16th century, it was dominant. So you've got this state building process that becomes reinforced by the Protestant Reformation and the Age of Exploration. You have the disruption of the fundamental unity of Western Christianity. You have all sorts of monastic properties confiscated by the state. And so as we move through the 16th and 17th century, right, we move from religions that primarily use mysterious, ancient languages to more and more you have religion in the vernacular, which simultaneously secularizes states. So you have an increasing trend towards secularization beginning in the age of the Reformation and the Renaissance. So beginning really in the 15th century, you have, but you could also maybe the 14th century, you've got this steady trend towards secularization. And so as a state and as people become more secular, then obviously their religious identity will be less important. So until I was about 14, 15, my religious identity as a Seventh-day Adventist was more important to me than any other identity. I didn't think much about racial terms. Then about age 14, I determined to become a journalist. So that profession increasingly becomes my identity. And as that profession increasingly becomes my identity, I become more secular. So you have maps in the 15th, 16th, 17th century increasingly showing state borders. You have Louis XIV, the French Sun King, who becomes the embodiment of royal absolutism. And as we move through the 17th century, we increasingly have the identification of the inhabitants within the state with their state, instead of their primary identity being religious or their social class. And you had increasing recognition that humanity was divided into different people who had different gifts. So almost everywhere in the 15th century, the clergy used a dead but sacred language for the purposes of prayer. So you had Latin for Catholicism. You had various forms of Orthodox Christianity, which would use Slavonic or Byzantine Greek. You had Hebrew for Judaism. You had classical Arabic for Islam. You had Sanskrit for Hinduism. You had Pali or classical Tibetan for Buddhism. And these ancient languages were also used for science and in courts and in state administration. And in Europe, Latin was the main language of international diplomacy until it was displaced by French in the 17th century, and then it was displaced by English in the second half of the 20th century. So monarchs and aristocrats would speak this prestigious literary language. And then with the inventing of the printing press in the 15th, 16th century, education becomes more important. Literacy rates start rising, but they're still, even in the 16th, 17th century, they're still below 10% in Europe, but you have the increasing power of the vernacular as opposed to these ancient languages. So the ancient sacred script languages were considered emanations from God, emanations from reality. They're an inseparable part of divine truth, but this was not the case with the new increasingly standardized vernacular languages. So as the vernacular language becomes more important, that is part of a growing trend towards secularization and setting a foundation for nationalism. So you had the growth of coffee houses throughout Europe and in the Americas beginning in the 18th century. You had all sorts of issues debated. Well-educated people were literate. They read books. So you had an increasingly egalitarian and meritocratic sphere where the strength of a person's argument no longer depended on their social standing nor on religious authority, but on the argument's coherence and persuasiveness. And initially, these public debates were primarily about cultural, scientific, and philosophical topics, but then politics increasingly becomes a subject of interest as we move into the end of the 18th century and enter the beginning of the age of nationalism from the modern academic perspective on nationalism. So from this modernist perspective, nation states and national citizenship did not exist before the end of the 18th century. America's first Naturalization Act was adopted in 1790. It awarded U.S. nationality only to free white people of good character. And this was the general understanding of Western citizenship until into the 20th century, that it was really only available to free white people of good character. So we had many European powers that had overseas colonies, and so of course they gave themselves in Europe many more rights than they gave the colonies. So you didn't have so much a nation state, but you had colonial regimes where they would give increasing rights to members of the European nation state, and you had the beginning of legislative pluralism in the 18th century. You had the growth of written constitutions, and we had these increasingly hard boundaries between insiders who were white and dominantly male property owners and outsiders who were women, people of color, the natives, the indigenous, and foreigners. So this was one major difference between the metropolitan areas and the colonies and rural areas. So inhabitants of the country were far more reluctant to accept this new move towards revolutionary nationalism and often opposed it outright. And so if you're on the right today, you are part of the country party, right? People in rural areas tend to be much more traditional in their politics. They tend to be more medieval even into today. So in many parts of Europe and in Spanish America in the 19th century, you had a revolution turning into a civil war between well-educated urban elites and more conservative rural folk, and we still have this tension with us today. Peasants and the least educated and the most rural generally resented attacks on monarchy and on organized religion, and they resented movements towards an increasingly secularized and democratic state. So before 1789 in France, one's social position was defined by your group membership and your legal status. So if you were clergy, if you're nobility, if you were a merchant, if you're a member of a guild, if you're a free farmer, if you're a peasant, right, all subject to different rules. Then you have a constitution based on legal equality. Suddenly all inhabitants of France subject to the same rules. There's one tax regime for all. This means that Frenchmen become equal and that one's nationality is now more important than one's social and religious identity. Now, who was worthy of citizenship? So Jews were not immediately given citizenship until the mid to late 19th century. Now in 2024, almost nobody in a Western nation would say, oh no, Jews, they're not deserving of citizenship. Black people, colored people, by and large, were not regarded as worthy of citizenship until the 1920s and on. So many rulers, such as the Tsars of Russia and people who ruled Finland and people who presided over Poland, thought their countrymen, by and large, did not have the capacity yet to be governed by constitutional means because they weren't educated enough, they were too ignorant. And you have the same trend in Egypt and in the Middle East. We can't copy Western laws because they are designed for enlightened and civilized people, and most people in Egypt are not, right? We need a ruling regime that is suitable for wild beasts, right? Many rulers regarded their citizens, their fellow countrymen, primarily as wild beasts, not worthy of democracy and liberal rights. In Liberia, in the 19th century, black settlers excluded the indigenous population from voting because they were not yet civilized. So during the age of revolutionary nationalism, you had groups who consistently lost. And these were those in the monarchy, the nobles, and the clergy, right? They were the least likely to promote nationalism because it would mean an abolition of their ancient privileges. Also, the lowest classes, and especially the peasants, were the least receptive to the nationalist message, nor were they impassioned by constitutions and elections. So as we move into the first 50 years of the 19th century, this is the era of romantic nationalism. So they're still influenced by the Enlightenment. They believe in progress, but they reject the mechanical worldview of Enlightenment thinkers, which was all about rationalism, universalism, and linear progress. Instead, they understand things in their historical place. So individual inspiration, imagination, and creativity is understood within its particular situation. I'm a situationist, and situationist thinking, historicist thinking develops primarily in German universities in the second half of the 19th century. So romantic nationalist authors, most of whom came from German lands, where German universities were the best in the world until World War II. Right? German universities focused on international differences, group differences, racial differences, argued that different people adapted themselves over time to particular geographic and climatic conditions, and humans are always adjusting to their natural surroundings to fit their own needs. And so different people have different gifts, and that each people, each nation develops its own personality and culture and distinctive gifts and distinctive weak points. So by the second half of the 19th century, nation states are increasingly accepted as the primary model for government. And you have the rise of history and historians who focus on creating a narrative for their people's past. Each nation seems to have a unique character and seems to be following its own special path in the universe. And we see artists in the 19th century shifting their attention away from religion and from topics of classical antiquity, instead focusing on crucial events in the nation's history. And they produce art that is highly theatrical, focused on a central hero, and often has a didactic message. So the romantic conception of the nation was dominant by 1848, and it influences the perception of the countryside, the view of the past. You have increasing appreciation of the vernacular languages of folk stories. You have a proliferation of nationalist literary and artistic works. You have a new focus on national past. You have the creation of museums to celebrate the nation's heritage. You have the restoration of ancient monuments. You have new commemorative practices. You have the construction of new buildings with clear nationalist connotations. And this is mainly in the realm of high culture, because people in the lower classes still don't much care about nationalism or voting. So romantic nationalist conceptions now increasingly linking nations to a particular language and a particular culture. So one thinker noted that nations are culturally and linguistically defined, that they were created by God, that everybody naturally belongs to one nation, and that if all nations just have their own culture and their own democratic state, there will be no more need for foreign aggression. All right, let's bring Kip back onto the show. Kip, what's going on, man?
Not too much, man. I was just trying to soak up the bigger message from what the point you were trying to make there. I know you were making several points there in my brain. You know how your brain does. It runs off in 12 different angles as you're making all the points.
Right.
And I'm wondering if I missed the bigger picture, but something that maybe needed to be said was that you were talking about those in the 1800s, those German guys thinking up the way things ought to be, what's best for everybody. And everybody, I guess, trusted their judgment or whatever. But it must be said, Luke, that the cities were so much smaller then. And they were probably a lot more cohesive, they had a lot of that, we talk about that Asabia a little bit more. They had that. I was very impressed with the city that I came from, Chattanooga, at what they were able to do as a town of like 25, 30,000 before all the factory workers showed up. And the thing I'm wanting to mention to you is when they were writing that stuff, and those Germans were thinking all that up, a big city was small, but then next thing you know, they just ballooned. I mean, these cities just ballooned during the Industrial Revolution to the point where these underclasses did not exist when those guys were in those German schools. You want to pick it up from there as I try to get my thoughts together?
Right. And then whenever you have a group creating a successful city or a successful civilization, it attracts people who are not part of those who created the successful civilization. And when when people with different gifts pour in, they often degrade the civilization. Civilization depends upon having walls whereby you can keep out those who are undesirable.
Right. New York City 200 years ago wasn't even 100,000 people. In the 1810 census, it was less than 100,000 people. And then it went from 100 to 250, and then to 500,000. And then it was like 1 million. And then it was 1.5 million, and then it was 2 million. And and before we knew it, 100 years ago, it was 8 million people. And they were never really meant for that. If you notice, when the city planners get together in New York or San Francisco, where Elliott lives, they build the downtown areas, the park benches and everything, so that the bums can't sit around and ruin the city 24 hours a day. You see, they gotta actually think. They gotta get extra smart to figure out how can we outthink these bums from just camping and just living in our city and just destroying it. They have to. They didn't have these considerations 200 years ago. I'm just saying. There's no model group now. There's no one group that says do it like them and everything will be okay. We're living in what you might want to call the post-social contract era. We're now, instead of everybody trying to keep their game as high as possible, as highbrow as possible, let's say in the the Victorians did. Now everybody points and said, look, they got an easier deal. They got an easier deal. So it just keeps we keep asking less and less of the citizenry. And I think America's screwed just long term, because this underclass, Luke, it treats everything in society. I saw this at Booker T. Washington at a very early age. I was like, what's going on here? What's so different from these certain groups of people than other groups of people? And what's different is they treat everything around them as if it's disposable. The schools, the neighborhood, not the shoes they're wearing. For some reason they draw the line in the sand on certain things, but the community at large, fucking disposable. Luke Ford, can you speak to that? Because that's the mentality I saw.
Right. So the more of a sense of agency and capability that you believe you have, then the more carefully you'll treat yourself, and the more carefully you treat yourself, the more carefully you'll treat other people and other communities. On the other hand, when you don't feel like you have the power to shape your life and to affect the world around you in a positive direction, then when you don't venerate your own capability and excellence and skill, then you're going to treat yourself casually and carelessly, and everyone else casually and carelessly as well. So
yes.
So some people, all right, you just see the amount of self-respect that they display, and with that, the respect that they have for other people, and then you encounter someone who shows very little self-respect, then you can count on them showing you very little respect as well.
Yes, sir. In theory, the cities are laid out perfectly. They're laid out perfectly. It's the polis that fucks them up. You get what I'm saying? It's the deracinated polis that fucks them up. And,
yeah, it's bad. It's bad students, not bad schools.
Yeah. It's the you heard the stories. We've all heard the stories when the first crop of Jews and the first crop of Italians and the first crop of Irish people showed up in the 1800s here. The whole neighborhood was parenting them, was it not, Luke? The whole damn neighborhood was parenting them, right? And we flipped that. Now, your principal would probably lose his job if he gave you a paddling or something. So we flipped that, and that's something that's not in all those calculations. I'm sure those were well-meaning, smart, liberal Germans that thought that shit up, but they're not taking into consideration the fact that this cohesiveness that the Italians and the Irish and the Jews spoke about, it was there in 1870, it was there in the 1890s, it was there in 1925, and then it disappeared somewhere, maybe around the war years. I'm so impressed when I see pictures of old baseball games and stuff, the way everybody's all dressed up in with their hats and their coats. They took life so much more seriously than we do now. But I may be getting a little bit off subject.
No, that's still very much on topic. It's a higher degree of self-respect that they displayed than many of our fellow citizens today.
And one thing that you glossed over, but you did mention it. You mentioned those coffee houses, and I don't know when that blasted onto the scene, but that pizzazz, that intellectual vigor or whatever, that was something. I think people take that for granted now. Personally, I'm not a coffee drinker, so I actually had to actually kind of read about this through history. But it's weird how something as simple as coffee, can spark things, but it may have played a part, somewhat in the jazzy little cosmopolitan feeling that everybody initially had in those cities. You get what I'm saying? The way it probably was, you can almost imagine the synergy that went on in those coffee houses. You get what I'm saying, Luke?
Yeah, so coffee houses would fuel ideas, while pubs where people drink alcohol, that's a depressant, but caffeine is a stimulant. So some people have argued in an overstated fashion that the stimulant of coffee was essential for the Enlightenment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You were talking about cons, and I think you maybe were mentioning something to do with Mr. Prager or whatever. But I was just letting you know that just an idea of how greasy I used to be. I used to pay loan officers $50 for every customer appreciation letter they would get, and I even told them basically on day one, this is kind of what I'm expecting. This is what I would like it look, what I would like for them to look like, and I paid them $50 a closed loan extra for each one of these customer appreciation letters, and I had them wallpapered all over the conference room, the closing room where they would close the loans, just to create that a home field advantage. Try to put the customer at ease or whatever. But people, they don't realize, but when they see stuff like that, when they see stuff like what you're talking about with Dennis Prager, the radar should go up. You shouldn't get more comfortable. You should actually start investigating more. You get what I'm saying? Look forward. When you see somebody.
Yes, but I don't think it's sleazy. I think that's just good business. It's a good business practice. It's just the way people work is that we are comforted by seeing positive reviews.
Yeah. If you would give me about 30 seconds.
Yeah. Go ahead and yep. Just do your thing. Everybody wants to hear about the good parts about being a sports fan.
Like they're happy. They're just, staying in bed sad, don't want to go anywhere the next day. But if your team wins, I
had a little note to try to keep track so I don't, as a pothead, you'll lose your train of thought or whatever. And then my stupid flashlights, my rechargeable flashlight started going out on the fritz on me. But what I was going to say, I was so tickled when I saw that somehow Patrice made your thumbnail for yesterday's show. And it reminded me of his love-hate relationship with the Asian people, because he searched all over the greater New York area and couldn't find no one except an Asian who could clean his fish tank. And he couldn't, do it right. You get what I'm saying? Do it in a way with a fish drive. He couldn't find anybody but an Asian that cleaned his clothes the right way, and they didn't come back with smudges that they didn't have when he dropped them off, And he couldn't find anybody except an Asian to make that beef and broccoli. He wanted to cut them out of his life because he thought they had the personality of flypaper. He thought that Well, you know how black people are. They're lively. They've got some sort of spirit about them. And Asians, if you'll think about it, they're like on the opposite end of the spectrum of that. So he had a hard time getting them to warm up. And strangely enough, in Elliott Blattville, San Francisco, that was the one place where he said they had the best Asian. They had the Asians where he wished the rest of America had those particular Asians. But he said for some reason it was San Francisco only. They never went across the country, and he never could get those kind of Asians in New York City. But yeah, have you ever had like one group of people that you just had a particular hard time, but at the same time you like them, but you can't replace them? That's a strange position to be in. It didn't look forward.
Yeah, I've never had his particular problem where you absolutely need one group of people for certain things. I've never had that, but there have been groups of people that I've been more or less fond of.
I was going to say, you mentioned Mr. Turrentine earlier, and to boil it down, I think he's doing a good job of capitalizing on the just giving the unvarnished opinions that everybody stopped giving 8 years ago. He's doing nothing more than that, is he not? Other than maybe he's answering his phone. He's being available other than that. But that's all he's doing. I mean, it seems like refreshing, but when you boil it down, that's all he's doing. Am I missing something, Luke?
He is an accomplished Democratic political strategist. He's not a nobody. He was chief of staff for the governor of Colorado. He has had a long career in politics, and he's able to see the other side's point of view, even though he doesn't usually share it. So he is distinctive. He's so much better than Tim, the guy who went before him on the show. That Dan Turrentine does not slant things for his own side. So Sean Spicer is very much a Republican who sees almost everything in a prism that favors Republicans, but Dan doesn't usually typically slant things to try to favor his own political side. If his political side is screwing up, he will just come out and say it. Sean Spicer is much more of a partisan, so I think Dan's an extraordinary political animal.
Dan is personally showing that there's a market for that, don't you say? They went. We can actually blame Fox News for being being the first one that was so successful to slant in one direction, and then hell, next thing we do, they were all slanted. Dan may give somebody the inspiration that, hey, as a network, maybe we should become a centrist again. I'm not holding my breath for that, but you think maybe he could inspire a whole network to, think outside the box and try to come at things objectively again, the way maybe it used to be. God only knows.
Well, I just think he's a good model for individuals that most people will be better off displaying a little more empathy.
I know empathy. Speaking of empathy, I know Pelosi's fall really fucked you up. It fucked up your sleep for, what'd you say, 4 or 5 days?
Oh, yeah. I just couldn't sleep at night.
You fucked up.
Yes.
She's getting a hip replacement. Is that? Have you been able to find any solace in that?
I actually haven't thought about her. So, I mean, I don't like actively wish ill on my political enemies. Usually, I just don't think about them very much.
I know you wouldn't consider him an enemy, but there's a dude named Mr. Beast. As I was looking to see if you were on the air tonight, I could see that this weird looking dude has just put a video up that's getting ready to cross 20 million views in 8 hours. How does somebody like that that strikes me as being I don't know, how does somebody like that find such mass appeal like that? Or is it
he
worse?
studies the algorithm and he learns what people want and he gives it to them. So when I was having sex with porn stars, they would say things about how amazing my cock was. I don't think I ever had a non-porn star tell me what an amazing cock I have. So when you want to be a professional, right, you learn the things that you need to give your customers.
Yes, sir. You know, you and I kind of been doing a back and forth about what the future lies. And the other day I mentioned Robert Anton Wilson's jumping Jesus phenomenon. But what I didn't do a good job of trying to like sell the point that since the time of Babylon, basically the West, the center of the West, has been creeping further and further westward. It moved from Babylon there to the Mediterranean area and stayed around in Greece and Rome for a while, and then moved up towards Paris and all through continental Europe. And then, probably we know probably about the 1800s, the home of it was London. And then it crept across the shore to New York. And then, of course, Hollywood set its foothold about 100 years ago. And I would say it's a signpost, a milepost or whatever, whenever they tell us a line of thinking that chips are an integral part of America. And oh, by the way, we should be building chips in Taiwan. You get what I'm saying? Can you not notice that creep to the west? I'm telling you, that's a big pond, the Pacific Ocean. And I also agree with you that their GDP is only 2/3 of ours. But don't you see that trajectory there? You say maybe I'm jumping the gun, but tell me you can see.
No, I think it's the opposite. That the Western explosion in influence is probably the exception over the past few thousand years. That it was probably China and Japan and the Far East these were the most advanced civilizations until about 800 years ago. And now the higher average IQ of Northeast Asians, the Chinese, the Japanese, and the Koreans is reasserting itself after this explosion of Western dominance, which is the exception in the past 3,000 years, not the rule.
Okay. Well, we'll just, it's happening right in front of our eyes, so we'll just play it by ear and keep notes, won't we? There. You got anything to say about like drones everywhere? What's the have you had time to kind of digest this whole drone phenomenon thing over the past days or weeks?
Well, when something becomes a phenomenon, obviously it feeds on itself. So all sorts of people are getting out there and launching their own drones to try to figure out what's going on, or they want to be part of what's going on. They want to get infected by the excitement and be part of the story. So the story is building on itself, but the fundamental fact of we have no effective defense against drones and drone attacks, I think, is the most important defensive and security concern.
My God, what do you think about it? Now, I don't sit around thinking like this, but just as we're talking, I'm sitting there thinking a man can go through an unmanned border with a little $10 drone with some C4 explosive and go to any nuclear reactor in America, run that drone right down that big cone, and he could probably cause us a problem. Wouldn't you think?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of potential problems with drones, and eventually we're going to have some huge catastrophe, and then our security establishment will start taking this threat more seriously.
Yeah, and people and property. It's not just that the property, not just the property that you thought, well, we've got that's behind 3 layers of fences or whatever. People too, not just property. People, nothing is safe from those drones. And I really, very early on when that Russia war broke out, sometimes I would accidentally see footage of like them trying to drop bombs on helpless soldiers. Now I know that's the theater of war. That's why I don't like watching that stuff. But I feel sorry for those motherfuckers when you see the end is nigh for them. It's a bad thing. It don't even seem like a fair fight when the guy they're fighting against is sitting somewhere in air-conditioned environs, with probably some contemporary Christian music or something playing in the background. It's almost sickening when you think about it from that perspective. You know what I mean, Luke Ford?
Yeah, that's why Elon Musk may be onto something. Why are we spending billions of dollars on planes when drones are much more cost efficient and deadly?
Yeah, obsolete. Isn't that sad? Some little $5 toy can make things totally obsolete. And the worst part about it for you and me and any taxpayer, I guess, is that when they sit around in those rooms with the stars on their shoulders in Washington, D.C. talking about stuff, whoever's got the scariest plan, the most catastrophic worst case scenario, that's who wins the day. That's who they'll spend the big bucks and start. They'll be preparing for that specific strategy, you know. And in the end result, you look around, and a lot of times the biggest, if you look at where has the other team got us the worst, I would say that 9/11, they got us pretty good with 19 dudes that were trained to fly planes here in America, doing what they did with box cutters. You know what I'm saying? Ain't nobody in the Pentagon sit around and defend planned against that. They planned for fancier stuff. You get what I'm saying? In the end, it was simple stuff. It was simpler stuff like that. You would have thought somebody.
There's a great saying: defense establishments always plan to fight the last war, not the next one.
I was gonna say, it got me thinking when you were saying you were, I don't know, down for a little bit for a couple of days, and not only was it rest, I guess you just wasn't feeling it from an inspiration side. Have you come up with any good ways over the years to try to rejuvenate yourself whenever the creative well kind of runs dry like that? Have you got any go-tos?
Yeah, the best one is other people, right? Interactions with other people I find the most stimulating. So obviously most people I don't have any particular desire to interact with, but when I talk to someone who's intelligent, that's the most inspiring thing, the most likely thing to turn me around. Number two, cleaning or organizing something always puts me in a better frame of mind. Getting outside and exercising, but of everything, conversation with smart people is the most stimulating thing that can turn me around.
I think it is weird though, the way our interests themselves, you know, the things that you think that you might be most attached to, they wax and wane. You get what I'm saying, Luke Ford?
Yeah.
It all has a time and space element to it. There's nothing that you hold on to 24/7, 365. Even if you try, you know,
Yes.
even when you try, that's strange. I was going to try to see, can I speak to you a little bit about college football before we get off here?
Sure.
It's kind of lost its charm for me since the NIL and the corporatization. Are you familiar with any of that stuff? Or am I speaking
Yes. So now college athletes, I think it's great. They get to make money. Previously, only universities got to make money, but now athletes and the free market get to earn financial rewards for their efforts.
10-4 on that, but it's had a flattening effect of the talent, you know, across the board. If you would, I don't know when UCLA has been like great in football, but if you just take, I remember USC, your crosstown people that you hated, they were pretty good like maybe 20 years ago.
Yes.
And when they were good, if you'll notice, they had 2 deep and sometimes 3 deep on the depth chart of talent. So like when USC was playing UCLA, that was easier than the practices they were having. You get what I'm saying? Because they might have had NFL guys on the second team. That was definitely the case for Tennessee back in the time when, say, Peyton Manning was going to college there. So they were only getting 3 or 4 contests on a Saturday against other teams that were anywhere as hard as what they were going through in their own practices, you know, and so that's over with now, because now the 6th best player
but the good thing is that that schools have to compete for athletes, that athletes have more freedom about where to go, and people will generally behave better if they're incentivized to have to compete rather than just taking athletes for granted once they've committed.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, but there's a guy named Tyler Barron that left Tennessee, and then like 2 weeks later, he had signed up with Ole Miss and got whatever trappings they were giving him. And then he said, fuck them, I'm going to Louisville. And by the way, he didn't have to give anything back. Went to Louisville, got whatever little trinkets or whatever Louisville was promising him. Sat around there for a month or so. Said, I'm going to see. I think the grass might be greener somewhere else. And he went to the University of Miami Hurricanes. So 4 schools in 6 months. You know where I'm going with this, Luke. You see what I'm doing? They don't have the guardrails that even NFL has, is what I'm saying. They got away. What you might have been saying was true, where they got away with it for so long that they now think they're a body with like no teeth, you know, just dentures or whatever. So they don't want to stick their foot down. So the Tyler Barrons of the world just do whatever they want. And what I'm saying is it's what created the situation where we had last year, which Florida State 13-0, but because their quarterback was injured, the NCAA committee said, you're not good enough for the Final Four tournament at the end of the year. We're going to rank you 5th or 6th. And of course, they were bummed out about that. And Georgia beat the tar out of them in the bowl game, 63-3. So I saw what they call a hype video, where they're like getting ready for the new 2024 season. And it was called Revenge Tour. You wouldn't think you'd have a team that goes 13-0 and wins the ACC Revenge Tour, but that's what they called it, Revenge Tour. Luke, 2-10. That's how the Revenge Tour went, 2-10. And thank God Charleston Southern was on the schedule, or it would have been 1-11 for the mighty Florida State Seminoles. So you see, nobody's protected, because if I've just told you, you can't keep a 2-deep or a 3-deep roster. So if you're a team, let's say you're one of these 12 teams getting ready for the tournament, I don't know if anybody is in this situation, but maybe you're a team that you've already lost like 5 or 6 starters on defense from injuries or whatever going through. There's nobody stepping in. There's no kick. The only people you'll have stepping in is going to be the true freshman, you know, that's never seen a snap of Pac-10 football or SEC football. All he can relate it to is what he was doing in high school. He's not ready, you know. So I just think that it's kind of ruining the sport. Back to you.
Well, I've got an open mind. I'm not a huge college fan, moderate college fan. I enjoy having it on in the background. I like the new playoff format where there are 12 teams that go to the big show. Elliott Blatt, you're back, bro. What's going on, Elliott? Elliott, you got to unmute.
Oh, sorry, bro. You caught me by surprise. I had muted. I was washing dishes. I'm here.
What's going on, man?
Oh, bro. Tough week. A long string of indignities I'd suffered this week.
Talk to me. Tell me where it hurts.
Okay. All right. So just a little background. I can start with a little background, right? So 2 days ago, what's today? Thursday. It was Tuesday evening. I'm washing dishes, and suddenly I realized that I'm standing in a pool of water, like warm, fetid water. Like, and if there's any sensation I hate, it's that my toes are being covered with warm, fetid water.
And it came from a gay bathhouse.
Not quite. A pipe had burst underneath my sink, right? And all the water that was water I thought was washing was spilling out under the sink and onto the floor. And it was a major disaster. Major disaster. So I don't know if you know that sensation, because you know.
Oh yeah, I was doing a podcast. I was interviewing Jenna Jameson, circa 2004, and sewage was coming up out of my shower, and and flooding into my guest house while I was live interviewing Jenna J.
That must have been the worst feeling ever.
It was not a good feeling.
No. Okay. So mine wasn't quite that bad. Your situation sounds worse on both ends, but nevertheless, it was distressing nonetheless. And so this is just background here. We're talking background. So called the landlord, arranged for the plumber, etc. You know, it all happened. I had to wait, 48 hours, but it finally got resolved this morning. And the pipe is fixed, and the floor was dried, and life resumed. But it just left me with this ambient feeling of agitation. Just having your life disrupted in this minor way, just kind of lights this subtle fuse. Kind of burns at your nerves slightly, because it just gets you off your game just a little bit. Because this whole world, this whole economy is just predicated on your ability to perform, whether or not your sink is exploded. You've still got to just power through these situations and keep your wits about you and just perform. You got to be there.
Yep.
So that's what I did, bro. And so, but the agitation was still in the background. So flash to today, and then so that was 2 days ago. I'm like, I told you I bought a bunch of books, and I've been needing people to help me list these things on eBay. So I've been recruiting friends and so forth. And so I was working with this old girlfriend of mine, and I was trying to get her to play along, try to hire her for this. And it just seemed like she was deliberately trying not to understand what I was saying. Have you ever experienced that?
Yes, quite common. People,
okay.
Yeah, it's a very common human strategy. Kids do it all the time to their parents. Employees do it.
What are they trying to do? They're trying to be vulnerable so you take care of them or something? Is that what's going on?
No, they feel incentivized to not tell you the truth. I mean, people do this because it's a strategy that has worked for them previously.
Okay. Well, it caught me by surprise, right? And yet at the same time, I'm trying to practice personal discipline here and just keep my emotions in check,
Mm-hmm.
And I'm working through this, and I'm breaking things down and making it step by step, easy as possible. So making it impossible not to understand, which I think maybe a better strategy in retrospect, because it's the more I broke things down, the more attention I was paying, right? So it's a way, maybe that was the thing, to try to get people to pay more attention to you. You need to act dumb.
Now, are you already paying her? I mean, was she incentivized?
No, I'm training her to put her in a position where she can be in a position where she can do some real work.
Why didn't you give up after 2 minutes?
Well, there's residual feelings.
You're hoping to get her into bed. Yeah.
Well, I remember. I mean, she has an outstanding rack, bro. Outstanding.
Okay.
And I'm just remembering that rack, bro.
Yeah.
And I'm well, maybe we go back in time or something.
Yeah.
Obviously, these types of thoughts are working in the background, but this is not really a realistic possibility now. But nevertheless, connections are built between people, and it's hard to sort of you overlook certain things, bro.
Yeah.
Human beings are complicated, bro. I'm not a machine.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm not a machine, bro. All right. So anyway, we get through this thing barely, and it just leaves me super, super, super agitated and annoyed and stressed. My nerves had been stretched to their very limit, right? But I didn't blow. I didn't freak out, but I was definitely stretched, And so this whole situation comes to an end, and then I have to go downtown, right? And so to go downtown, I have to go through 18th and Castro. I'm going to slightly abbreviate the story because I realize you've been on long. So 18th and Castro is the monkeypox epicenter of San Francisco. It is as gay as it gets in San Francisco. And San Francisco is as gay as it gets in the United States, with the possible exception of LA. So anyway, I'm at 18th and Castro. I'm driving on Castro. I'm trying to take a left onto 18th. But as I'm trying to make a left, so one car goes out into the middle of the intersection, signaling left, right? And I'm straddling the crosswalk, which is one of those rainbow sidewalks. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
They paint the sidewalk in rainbow flag sort of colors.
Beautiful,
So it's
beautiful.
like rainbow.
Yeah.
You know, I'm sort of straddling it, and I'd like to make a left too, but at the same time, suddenly a fire truck siren erupts, right? And the traffic turning left is delayed because we have to wait for the fire truck to pass by. You know, those are the rules. You got to yield to emergency vehicles, right? And so fire truck finally passes. The person in the intersection makes the left, but I'm stuck. Then the light turns red. So I'm stuck in the intersection, straddling the rainbow sidewalk, right?
Yes,
Which
sir.
in normal circumstances is bad practice, right? You wouldn't really do
Yes.
that, right?
Yes.
But
you don't want to be vulnerable on a rainbow sidewalk.
Right. So I was basically faced with the situation: do I run the red light, or do I remain where I was in the middle of the sidewalk? I had no opportunity to make the lawful decision. I was damned if I did, damned if I didn't. And I opted to stay where I was and not make the turn, stay in the sidewalk, right? And I'm going, I know for a fact somebody is going to give me shit for this, right? As I'm waiting for the next green light cycle to go through, and it's going to be like a minute and a half or something, and I'm just waiting there. And I say, there is going to be some idiot that's going to yell at me. And I'm basically, you know, the countdown is going off in my head. 10, 9, 8, because people are walking past and kind of flooding around my car, some in front, from and back. You've been in that situation before?
Yes.
You know what I mean? It's stressful, bro.
Yes.
And so I'm waiting, and then finally, sure enough, someone bangs on my window, and this homo starts, love and inclusion, you know, but this homo starts screaming at me, right? And so I roll down my window, and I said, "Did you see the fire truck? Are you that effing stupid?" I'm screaming, by the way. I'm at 10 out of 10 rage here. My head is like a tomato. I'm so angry right now because I knew this was going to happen. It happened anyway. And this moron is going to sort of tear into me, right? Because he realizes he's got a civic duck. I'm in violation of the rules. He's got all the righteous indignation of the world behind him. And he's going to just light into me. And I said, he's not going to realize the context. He's going to forget the whole fire truck incident. And he's just going to do that little homo tutu wearing superior dance that these sort of homo Karens kind of do. You know what I'm talking about? Have you been on the other side of that?
I can't recall.
You know, it's just sort of like this. You shouldn't do that. Yeah, get away. People have to, you know that tone of voice they all take, and it's like identical between one and the other. You've been outside. You just don't want to admit it because you're politically correct. I understand. Excuse me. So he yells at me, and I yell at him, right? And then he's mad at me because he didn't expect me to fight back, you know. I fought back, and that he took as being very antagonistic, and so he sort of smacks my rear view mirror on the side, you know, and he smacks it, and it kind of collapses in. It's sort of meant to collapse, but he did violence against my car, bro. You know, he smacked my car.
And he gave you a car monkeypox.
He gave my car monkeypox. He assaulted my hero system. My car is a big part of my hero system, bro. And he assaulted it. And somehow this is sort of, it's kind of like the Ferrari that you talked about before, you know? This is an extension of me, bro.
Yes.
And so he smacks the windshield, he smacks the rear view mirror. And then I just completely lose it. And I start screaming at him. I fucking just scream at him. Why are you so stupid? Why can't you look around? You know, and sort of when I get really, really angry, I can be really, really cutting in my sort of vocal tone, but I also can be pretty incisive, You know, I can make a logical point while being incredibly angry. Sort of one of my superpowers, bro.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm cutting into, I obviously hit home with him, right? Because something I said obviously struck him. Because, you know, he started smiling and laughing, you know? And like, he didn't want to fight anymore because something I said really had hurt him. But he had to say something. So he looks at me and he says, you know what he says, Luke?
No, I don't.
No, you got to say, what did he say, Elliot?
What did he say, Elliot?
He said, you're fat.
Well, that's a good point.
Yeah. He wasn't wrong, bro.
Yeah. Yeah.
So he did the damage he needed to do. And then I was hurt, bro. And so you know what I said back to him?
No.
What
did you say, Elliot?
I said, you're a forgot. Now, I didn't say forgot, bro.
No, I understand. Oh, my God. You said something homophobic.
I did, bro.
Oh, my God.
And
hate speech.
Then I rolled up my window real quickly, you know. And then, and then I just sort of sat in the car waiting for the light to turn green so I could finally take a left. But this time I'm in a full sweat, like a full-on sweat.
Yeah.
Because it's very rare that I just completely lose my cool in public like that.
Nah, not you.
Not me, bro. I'm love and inclusion all the way. And I was listening to Halpern at the time, bro.
To the presumption of grace.
I had the presumption of grace. I'm nodding along. You know, I'm feeling love. I'm feeling inclusion. I'm extending grace. Everything. And then this thing you know, I said, I'm just feeling good about myself. But then, you know, then the shit hit the fan, bro. And then I started thinking about, so I felt really bad and embarrassed about this. You know, I was in a full-on sweat and I'm like, how did I lose my cool so quickly? You know, I started doing, as I'm driving, I'm like trying to dissect the experience. And then I came to some rather painful realizations.
Wow.
What were the realizations, bro?
What were the realizations, bro?
Yeah, I'm just trying to help you. So basically, we had both made a threat assessment, right?
Yeah.
He saw me and he said, I can attack this guy because he's not going to fight back.
Yeah.
And then I looked
he's
at
fat.
him and I said, I can attack this guy because he's not going to do anything. So we both had permission to escalate. Do you ever realize that? Like,
yes.
if he had like, you know, a handgun strapped to his waist, right? I wouldn't have escalated. If I had a handgun that was visible, he wouldn't have escalated, right? There was a certain threat assessment that we both did mutually. And that led to the conflict. Do you ever think about that?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, this was instinctive on both of your parts, and it wasn't really about the other guy, and it wasn't really about you, right? You were both, you know, a loaded gun just waiting to go off.
Yeah, but it was like, but there's something about the election, you know, and Trump having won, it felt like I had permission.
A mandate.
Yeah, it was like I was expressing the Trump mandate in a very sort of microscopic manner.
And on retrospect, do you think you could have handled the whole thing differently?
Well, I would like to think so, right? But I was a lit fuse waiting to go off.
And why do you think that was?
Well, remember the backstory, like the initial.
Oh, it was the water pipe.
Well, the water pipe, and then the sort of long, frustrating session with the ex-girlfriend. You know, the just this.
It just built and built.
Built and built, and then suddenly, the spark that was needed to ignite.
Yeah.
presented itself.
And you just took it out of this poor gay dude.
That's right.
He was just minding his own business, banging on your car like a concerned citizen.
Yeah. Then he started, once he hit the rim, I was fumbling for my phone because I want to take his picture. I said, maybe I should press charges. I started thinking that way. And I said, then I couldn't figure out the phone fast enough to do that and so forth. And it was just this maelstrom of bad emotions. And so the question is like, we all think we can handle a conflict until the actual conflict manifests. And then we realize how unprepared we actually are.
Yeah. You never know what's going to happen when you escalate.
Exactly. And I thought I knew this going in. The truth is, it's one thing to know something intellectually, but it's another thing to have trained for it.
Yeah. And you also felt safe because you were in your car.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
If you had a bad back and you were just standing there, with back pain, I don't think you would have been looking for I don't think you'd start out with anyone.
Can you give me a visual, Elliott? Was this more of a Richard Simmons type character? Is it more like that little queer in the plaid shirt from the San Francisco gay men's choir that says he's coming from kids? What is the
type?
Huh?
Kind of in his early 50s, I guess. But he worked out still, because I think that's where he hit me with the "you're fat" slur. He fat shamed me, bro, and stuff.
Like something off The Village People, something like that.
No, he wasn't that fit. But for an older guy, he was more fit than your average older guy.
I remember I was walking and I was standing there waiting for the light to change for the walk signal to cross the street, and this woman came up and she had very pale skin, and it was the middle of summer, and I said, "You're so pale," and she said, "You've got a fat stomach," because this was like the most I'd ever weighed. I was like 190 pounds.
Boy.
If you were gay, Elliott, would you have dated this guy?
Oh, there's no easy answer to this question. He was for his age, I would say, on the attractive side. Sure.
What do you think about those ads for HIV PrEP? So you want to have random sex with strangers in alleys, and you don't want to wear a condom, so you take some kind of HIV PrEP drug to prevent yourself from getting AIDS. And you see these commercials, everywhere on TV. And have you seen them? How do you feel about them?
I see them all the time at bus stops and so forth. And I find them very disgusting. And it's actually, I have trouble believing I'm not living in some sort of satire. Like, I'm not being set up. You know what I mean? Like, it's so, off-putting, and it really triggers my disgust reflex, bro. Sorry to say.
I'm sorry to hear that. There's no version of these PrEP ads that you find uplifting.
No, there aren't.
Let's try to get this next shot in before lunch.
Not to go too far together here.
So I'm starving.
I was trying to make this not so much about this particular interaction, more about conflict preparedness.
Yeah.
And have we actually war gamed? Take one. Have we actually thought about how we're going to deal with real life conflict?
I learned I could stay undetectable with fewer medicines.
How do you defend against monkeypox?
Have so many medicines, but Dovato has less, and it's just as
Say it again?
How do you defend against a live monkeypox when they're just swinging it around in front of you?
Well, you stay out of the bathhouse for one thing, but there is no defense, bro. That's why the disgust reflex is triggered the way it is.
But the fewer times that you burst out at other people, right, the less likely you are to have escalations, right? play a significant role in our own misery. So the more calm and centered you are, the less likely you are to get in these situations. And I'm thinking, should you have probably turned? Could you have turned safely instead of being stuck there on Rainbow Street?
Okay, well, okay. I could have turned. I would have been probably violating, traffic law. I could have. And I've been busted for so many different traffic offenses, little minor traffic offenses, and so
like
I live
solicitation.
In
Solicitation.
No, bro. I was once texting. I was once was it live chatting on 40's show, and I got pulled over.
I didn't know that.
For texting, I didn't tell you that. This is way back in the Babylonian Hebrew days. I was like texting a response to the
Living
live
with
chat,
HIV,
and I got
I
pulled over.
learned I could stay undetectable with fewer medicines.
Most HIV pills
So,
have so many medicines.
I've been busted
And it's
a
just
surprisingly
as
large number of times
That's why
for
I
minor
switched to Devano
traffic
HIV
offenses.
treatment. Fact.
Like
You
I
can
got
get
busted
HIV
for a
from
rolling
girl. That's how
stop.
I did it.
You ever gotten busted for a rolling stop?
Yes, many times.
Really?
Many times. I've probably gotten 3 tickets for a rolling stop.
You cannot exist in this world without executing a rolling stop once in a while. There's just no way. You've got to get where you're going, bro. But anyway, I but you've gotten busted. And you know how it is. It's like you just gotta take one for the team. But I was going somewhere. I lost the thread here. So why didn't I turn? But the bigger question is, I could have very easily just kept the windows rolled up and not engaged.
Or you could have mouthed, "I'm sorry."
Yeah, but I didn't feel that because I wasn't
okay.
Right, because I was genuinely in a lose-lose situation. Right, and I can't just do that. I can't be somebody that's just always apologize when I'm not truly.
Living with HIV, I learned I could stay undetectable with fewer medicines.
That doesn't strike. Would you have done that? Would you have apologized?
I think I would have.
You know, I'm cool with that. I just ain't.
But would you have felt sorry?
I don't know if I would have thanked, but I would have recognized that other people have been inconvenienced by my being there, and I think I would have recognized that and try to say
Bro, you
sorry.
would have lied. You would have lied just to avoid a confrontation.
It's not a lie. I am sorry that I'm inconveniencing other people.
That's not how I understand remorse.
I recognize
I
that
didn't
other people
have
have their own experience of life, and I am making their experience of crossing the street less convenient and more dangerous.
Yeah, but it would imply that you had done something intentionally.
No, it doesn't matter whether it's intentional or not. If I make other people's situation more uncomfortable and dangerous, whether I intended to or not, I think I would feel bad about that. Kip, do you want to weigh in?
I was just thinking about, I live in a town of less than 1,000 people if you take away the students from the college. And I've managed to ruin 4 relationships with complete strangers, like what Elliott described earlier. I've done that in the past 12 months or less. And I was just wondering, was there a trigger? You may relay just quickly what had happened for you, Luke, and see if we can see if
Sure, go ahead. Sure.
Okay. Number 1, I'm walking my dog around the park, and I've got 2 dogs that are very social. They're smaller, like 45 pounds apiece. And then I've got one that's a little bit more ferocious that I keep on a leash. Well, anyway, one of the smaller dogs had gotten 100 yards ahead, and it was kind of like sniffing the wind of a couple that were walking in front of us, probably like 18. I don't know if you ever seen that. Dogs will do that. They'll sniff the wind coming off people.
Yes.
And she was doing that. and he took a walking stick, and swung it around and poked at my dog. And I mean, instinctively, before I could think about it, I said, Peaches, get away from that jerk. And it just started a whole thing where he made like about a dozen threats. And I said, you know, if you're feeling froggy, just jump. You know, if you are feeling froggy, just jump. But you see, I started that, Luke. I'm the one that called him a jerk.
Well, you're Southern, and so you take offense. You're very violent people. I mean, you take honor and offense, you know, very seriously. And so, I mean, it's just part of your Southern heritage is that, you know, you're always ready to throw down.
Right. Well, I accused him of him being unneighborly, and he pointed my house is right there through the other, you know, side of the woods right there. And I said, so why are you being a jerk? You know, so why are you being a jerk to me? And he really didn't. So anyway, I was at the, there was a cigarette lady I was getting cigarettes at the Spur station, and there's only like 2 places in town to get these cigarettes. So she asked me for my ID one time, and then 2 days later, and then 3 days later, and then 1 day later. And about the 4th or 5th time when she asked for my ID, I said, lady, you know, I'm getting older every time you see me. I'm not getting any younger. And it's probably, she's triggering me because my ID is in my car. It's not on my person, you know. So about the 6th or 7th time she did it, I drew a line in the sand, told her she was stupid, told her that we've reached the point now to where she should have remembered me by now. Now it's a her problem and not a me problem, and that her boss is now losing money because I'm willing to drive 1 mile further into town, you know, to get the cigarettes elsewhere. Now I'm giving you the nice version, but I was being shittier than that. Yes. But I didn't give her the flared nostrils and the balled up fist or whatever, but I just gave her my opinion. So there again, she keeps saying she was doing her job. But before the time that I flew off the handle, I pulled over. I had talked to a cop at another gas station, and I asked him specifically, does she have to do this? And he says, no. If she's already checked your ID and recognizes you from before, no, she doesn't have to do that. So that's why I let her have it, because I'd already heard it in my mind from the horse's mouth, from the cop's mouth, because she was
wrong. She was wrong. My God, someone was wrong. She deserved. She deserved that bitch.
Yeah, man. So anyway, let me see. I'll give you one more. Well, I told you about that professor with his little dog Pumpkin. I did get the nostrils flared and the balled up fist with him, but and then the other one was the Dollar General. They give me a $5 off coupon if I spend $25. I spent the $25. It wasn't $5 off. And I listened to the clock in my head go tick, 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 tick. And it hit like 5.5 minutes. And they had 3 managers sitting around that cash register for a Saturday morning meeting. And I don't know, my loaf of bread went across the fucking store, Luke. You know what I'm saying? I said, you 3 fucking geniuses can't pull this together? $5 fucking off, you can't pull it together? They reach a point where my idiot meter says, okay, now we're down to a 95 IQ. Now it's a 94, 93, 92. And, you know, I feel like I've left Booker T. Washington. I feel like we're supposed to be beyond that. But when you get like 3 miles away from that university, the IQ drops to like 88, you know? So,
well, I absolutely think there's a time to be nasty and to be mad. That anger serves us when it enables us to deal with a situation where it's the most useful response. So I'm not sure if anger and rage was the most useful response in the instances that you just mentioned, but I find it, I employ it myself. There are times when the most useful and appropriate response is to get mad and to tell someone off. If it enables you to solve a problem that other approaches are not going to be useful for.
Right. 10-4 on that. Elliott, I have an anecdotal thing where Luke and I went back and forth. You know, he's big on the Ashkenazi IQ. You know, he likes to tout that. And I told him that anecdotally, I thought that gay men might be somewhere in that neighborhood. what do you think? You anecdotally, you're going to see 1,000 times more of them than I do. What's the average IQ of those fellas out there?
I'd imagine it's quite high in my experience. And what I do notice when I work in places with Jewish men is they seem to understand what's going on and are able to be on point, if that makes sense, right? And drive the ball forward. So, like, if I were investing in, if I were a VC and I had like large amounts of money and I saw a lot of Jewish men in leadership roles, I'd be very enthusiastic about that. That would be a win. That would be an invest signal.
You may have misconstrued my signal. I was asking about gay men.
Oh, did you say gay or Jay?
Gay.
No, I'm talking about gay men.
Who like to have sex with men.
Juxtapose those two groups.
I thought you meant Jay men, like Jewish men. All the sort of, all the new sort of YouTube algorithm self-censorship has got me confused. Gay men, well, I don't really interact with them basically at all. I find them, the times that I do, I find them, intelligence aside, their emotional level is so low that they can't really add value. They don't add value, but they're incredibly good at politicking. So they're able to sort of maintain their position through politicking, but not through merit. That's been my experience.
So anecdotally, would you say, now we're not talking about who's more successful in life. We're just talking about whatever that thing that's supposed to, IQ is supposed to be, what is it?
It's a shorthand.
It's really only gauging your aptitude. So if you could somehow compare gay men to Jewish men in just the aptitude department, would you say they're apples to apples, or what would you say there?
I wouldn't call it apples to apples. It's very hard to me sort of assess somebody's intellect, his raw intellect. It's the sort of fully contextualized person that you're engaging with that's emotionally balanced. And my experience has been that gay men, intellectual ability notwithstanding, there's generally some sort of emotional imbalance that prevents them from being truly effective.
Norm Macdonald called them the most decadent people on the fucking planet. You agree with that?
Strong case can be made. Who am I to disagree with Norm? No. Okay.
Well, I heard Luke a couple of weeks back. He's just reading the news, but he's reading about the plight of gay people. And in my mind, as Luke Ford is reading that bit, all I can hear is Norm Macdonald reminding me the most decadent people on the fucking planet. That's who we're supposed to have sympathy for today. Give me a break.
Okay, guys, let's wrap it up. Let's
wrap it up.
Any pressing final words? Otherwise, I want to move on.
All right, I'm done, bro. I've got my weight bench being delivered. All right.
Okay,
Shalom.
take care. Okay, Kip. I'll talk to you another time. Want to play first here from.
What does Jen Psaki care that a congressman had to reschedule their flight back to Michigan? Who cares? MSNBC's worried that things are not going smoothly, so we should just keep doing what we've been doing for the last 4 years. That hasn't worked, Jenny. That's why Biden lost. Joe Biden's checked out, and he's not even negotiating the spending bill.
Every day, more and more, it is shocking Biden's absence. Like, part of me wonders, like, where's your manhood? Like, I can't see George W. Bush or Bill Clinton allowing the incoming president to dominate. Where's Biden's pride?
Democrats have the White House and the Senate, and Trump, Musk, and Johnson are calling the shots. And Democrats know it. The media isn't even reporting what's in the bill. The media, just like they...
Okay, so what are the advantages to being a sports fan? There's an academic here who specializes in sports fandom.
That, again, I don't think people usually understand.
ultimately, why is it okay for us to be fans?
Every year or so, I teach a class, The Psychology of Sports Fandom, and it fills quite often. And you would think it would be filled with sports fans. Sure, most of the people in that classroom that take that class are sports fans, but every year, about 15 to 20% are non-fans. And they're sitting in that classroom trying to figure out, what am I missing? Why are all my friends so wrapped up in this stuff? And I just, quite frankly, don't get it. The reason that I suggest that people become sports fans is similar to the reason I would suggest that people become actively interested in any pastime. It brings with it advantages. It's a social activity. 1, 2, 3. You're going to feel connected to your friends. You're going to feel connected to your peers. You're going to feel connected to your university or your community. We've studied this so many times with sports fans. If you identify and you care about a local sport team, you have higher self-esteem, you have lower levels of alienation, you have lower levels of loneliness, you feel like you fit in more with your community, your connections are stronger, they're greater. There are clear psychological well-being advantages of caring about the local sport team.
Yes. Right? Fewer people commit suicide during major sporting events such as the World Cup, because even the most socially awkward people can find connection and some sense of social cohesion and togetherness during major sporting events. Here's John.
This is palatable to us. You're doing something we like. Then you move forward to 2013. Ted Cruz is allowed essentially by Mitch McConnell to shut down the government and has no strategy for its reopening, because Ted Cruz wanted to launch his presidential campaign, and he was the voice of the "we fight, we're not just going to spend like Democrats, and we fight and we're fighters." And they didn't have control of the House or of the Senate. So the weird position that Trump faces...
It was the Obamacare shutdown, right?
The Obamacare shutdown. This was after Obamacare passed. This was this... Yeah. He was going to make Obama... not implement Obamacare.
Right.
Okay. So the situation that now exists is that Republicans, you say to Republicans, shut the government down, and a whole bunch of them are like, great. Anytime you mention it, I love it. I love it. Shut it down. Shut it down. On January 3rd, the new Senate will be sworn in. It will be a Republican Senate. And the House will be sworn in, and it will be a Republican House, and there will be a Republican president of the United States. Will the public hold Donald Trump responsible for the workings of government in this way? Are Republicans responsible? Maybe not. Maybe it's it's too complicated. But they don't have Obama. They don't have a Democrat who is at the top that they are knocking down and attacking. They're the ones in charge, and the problem they face is that this is not a mandate election. We know it's not a mandate election because of the vote in the House. The fact that Republicans shrank, the Republican majority, which was already like 6 seats, shrank to 3 or whatever it's going to end up being, means that you cannot claim the Republican Party has a majority, has a mandate to work its will on the United States. The public voted for a completely dysfunctional House. Now, I know that's not the way people vote. People vote in local elections. The House is a local election, and so they're not, strategically voting in the same way. But I do. That's just the political reality.
Yeah, I want to just push back a little bit. I mean, the House Republicans' total popular vote was actually higher than Trump's. The national House vote was 51% for the Republicans, but thanks to our gerrymandered system and rotten boroughs in blue states, that computes to this extremely small majority. So,
and by the way, an important point to make, because come 2030, when the next census is done, the people that I trust and who seem to know a lot about this technically believe that there could be a shift of as many as 19 seats from the Democratic ledger into what would nominally, if the politics remain static, Republicans will have a natural 20-seat majority in the House, because the gerrymandering of 2020 was pretty severe on the Democratic side and state by state, and that but
right, big
all of the
20 point advantage when 2030 rolls around. All right, the way the census is moving, should be really good for Republicans in the House of Representatives. Bibi Netanyahu fighting his own war against elites. This is
escalated his conflict against the Lebanese Hezbollah terror group in September, said that such a move risks sparking an all-out war in which hundreds, if not thousands, of Israelis would be killed. 3 U.S. officials and 1 Israeli official told the Times of Israel. The assessment relied heavily on similar ones crafted by Israel's own intelligence community, the U.S. officials say, acknowledging that in both countries' assessments, the assessments proved wildly inaccurate within days, as the IDF methodically took out much of Hezbollah's missile and drone capabilities, dismantled its military infrastructure in southern Lebanon, picked off almost every member of its senior leadership, and killed or wounded thousands of operatives, many of them in audacious mass detonations of the terror group's communications devices. So we took out almost their entire leadership in these audacious actions. And here we have to remember, again, Herzl Levy and Gallant opposed the beeper operation. It was going to be a sound and let show. It wasn't going to be a big deal. And then, Netanyahu ordered it, and it decimated Hezbollah's leadership, and it caused almost no collateral damage. Almost nobody other than the terrorists themselves, including the Iranian ambassador to Lebanon, who also had a Hezbollah beeper, were wounded in this attack, and it decommissioned their entire leadership. Killed or wounded their entire leadership. And our military intelligence, our military leadership opposed it, as of course the U.S. did. Not only did they oppose it, but there was a criminal leak to Yediot Ahronot and New York Times reporter Ronen Bergman, who already said the night before the attack, he reported that Israel was considering some audacious, highly incendiary or irresponsible operations in Lebanon. And, he basically gave Hezbollah a heads up, which is why it had to apparently be pushed up, the operation, because they were afraid that they were going to lose all of the capabilities that Israel had amassed over 5 years because somebody in the IDF was trying to block it, which is shocking, and it's also a form of treason, I must say. At any rate, the person who insisted that Israel go forward no matter what the losses, because, of course, we're talking about to 100,000 Israeli civilians who have been internal refugees since October 8th when they were evacuated from their homes because of a fear that Hezbollah was going to carry out an October 7th type massacre of them along the border with Lebanon, that Hezbollah had a plan that they had already published to invade and conquer the Galilee and massacre the Israelis who live there. And so they've been internal refugees since October 8th, 2023. And Netanyahu said, we just can't keep going. We have to do what we have to do no matter what the cost. And we went forward, and guess what? We got a miracle, right? We went forward, we were brave, we were courageous, and it worked out that if Hezbollah wasn't an empty shell, it was a shell that we were able to decimate by blowing up their beepers and killing Nasrallah and a bunch of other things. So that was a massive action, and it took an enormous amount of courage because it was essentially going up against the entire military leadership of the IDF by doing this. And here the Americans are acknowledging belatedly, we got it totally wrong. And by the way, so did the Israeli intelligence services, which we have to remember, the same intelligence services that missed October 7th. At any rate, so that's one of the things. So thanks, Netanyahu. And then the second one is another report that was reported in the Israeli media yesterday. I mean, it was reported everywhere, I think I would assume, yesterday, which is that the head of the UN's nuclear watchdog, the International Nuclear Energy Agency, the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, Rafael Grossi, gave a statement where he said there's no point in trying to hold Iran to Obama's 2015 nuclear deal any longer because they're totally in breach of everything. Like, you can't talk to them about not stockpiling beyond a certain level or a certain quantity of uranium that's been enriched to 3.68% because they're already, they have enough fissile nuclear material that they've enriched to 60% to build, 12 nuclear bombs if they want to, just ratchet it up a little bit more to 90%, and then you have bomb-grade nuclear material. So he's saying Iran is already a threshold nuclear state. In other words, the 2015 deal that Obama and John Kerry and all of their clackers in the media and everybody in their Washington echo chamber were saying that this was really great and this was going to put, as Anthony Blinken to this day keeps saying, put Iran's nuclear program into a box. It didn't put anything into a box. This was an open road to nuclear capabilities, which Iran used. It was all a lie. Iran breached every single aspect of that deal, and they did it from the outset. I mean, they were already stockpiling more enriched uranium than they were allowed to under the deal from the get-go, right? And they expanded their uranium enrichment to 20%.
Okay, that was Caroline Glick with some commentary on Bibi going up against his own elites, very similar to the way that Donald Trump often has to go up against America's elites. I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.